10 paintings that constitute a cycle entitled Course of Empire. And let me just now, before I begin, just describe what you're seeing. This is the installation of the exhibition in room 1 upstairs. It consists of 5 paintings in black and white, or monochrome. There are some subtle colors worked in, that you see on the top register here. Below them are 5 more paintings executed 10 or 12 years later, returning to the same sites as depicted in the first series, but now executed in color and showing what has happened to those sites in the 12 years, 13 years before, since the black and white pictures were done. The first series in black and white was called Blue Collar, and all of the works in the series show the types of generic big box buildings in which blue-collar occupations were carried out. When they were combined with the second series for the Venice Biennale, for the American Pavilion at the Venice Biennale of 2005, Ed Ruscha gave them the joint title Course of Empire, and I will come back to explain that. At the Venice Biennale, the black and white series was in one room, the color series in quite another room. You did not see them together. They were shown immediately after that at the Whitney Museum of Art in New York City, at which point the black and white series moved down one wall, the color series moved down an opposite wall, so you didn't really see them together at that time either. When you were looking at the black and white, you had your back to the color pictures. This is the first time in which you are immersed in the painting surrounding you, and I will come back to explain what that is all about and how Ed Ruscha conceived of this installation of the 10-picture series. There is Ed Ruscha himself, as I say, born in 1937. He's recently turned 80. This is an early photograph, probably from about 1960, when he is a young man in his 20s. Classic, if I would say, American bad boy looks, exactly the kind of boy your parents forbade you to date. Coming then born in Nebraska, raised in Oklahoma, and coming to Los Angeles in the late 1950s to study art, but basically his mother sent him away so he wouldn't go to reform school. But he comes to Los Angeles at the end of the 50s, does not get into the art school where he wants to go, but gets into one much more liberal, much more open, much more at the center of what was beginning to emerge as a distinctive Los Angeles art scene, where he soon finds himself in a circle of friends. I show you this photograph from probably the late 50s, early 60s of downtown Los Angeles, clogged with automobiles then and now. The tower of Los Angeles City Hall in the distance, that tower made famous by the television series Dragnet and Sergeant Friday's famous phrase, "Just the facts, ma'am." And I think there is a characteristic of Los Angeles art emerging at that time that is just about the facts, as it were, an art of very specific objects and motifs. And I want to look at the world into which, in the very early 1960s, this young artist from Oklahoma, never having been to Europe at that point at all, the art scene that is emerging around him all of a sudden, the friends he is making who are participating in that art world, which at that moment must have been just about the most exciting in the world. I show you the Ferris Gallery in Los Angeles, a small storefront gallery founded by the curator Walter Hopps and the artist Ed Kienholz, anxious to show the most interesting art. And the most famous exhibition, perhaps, that they ever mounted came in 1962, when, long before they were ever seen in New York, Andy Warhol's now famous 32 soup cans was displayed. 32 canvases not hanging on the wall, but leaning on little shelves, all of them exactly the same, except that the flavor of Campbell's soup changes from one to the other. This kind of deadpan depiction of absolutely everyday objects, everyday commodities that announced the arrival of Warhol on the scene as the chief pop artist, as the purveyor of this imagery of absolute banality. This exhibition in Los Angeles hit a great chord. All of the artists were intrigued to find what was going on with this. Warhol himself was still very young at the time. And if one exhibition can be said to have pushed Los Angeles to the fore of the avant-garde, it was the presentation in '62 of the soup cans. But it was followed the following year by an even more important exhibition, one that now we see as an absolute turning point in the understanding of modern and avant-garde art. And that was the display the following year at the Pasadena Art Museum of the first retrospective exhibition ever given to the French artist Marcel Duchamp. The French artist, born at the end of the 19th century, coming up in Paris, participating in the Parisian avant-garde, but then moving off to create some of the most extraordinarily difficult works, at first it seemed, of the 20th century, which nonetheless would open up new possibilities for what he himself called a non-retinal art, an art not about looking, an art about ideas, most famously with his ready-mades. And you see some of them, the bicycle wheel, the bottle rack in the background. Now, Duchamp, living now in New York, had long before this announced that he was giving up making art, announced that he had stopped being an artist. It was a great lie, and had fallen beneath the radar of attention. But this young man on Duchamp's right, Walter Hopps, a young Los Angeles boy, the founder of the Ferris Gallery with Ed Kienholz, who had now come to be curator at the Pasadena Art Museum, had seen all of Duchamp's works in the collection of the great Los Angeles collectors, the Ahrensbergs. He was brought on a high school enrichment program at the end of the 40s one Saturday, and came back every other Saturday for 5 years to live with these works. And it is he, more than anyone else, a very close friend of Ed Ruscha's, who reintroduces Marcel Duchamp not only to Los Angeles, but to the world. Marcel Duchamp, who now, 55 years on, the literature on whom is far bigger than the literature on Picasso, far bigger than the literature on Matisse. He is the artist who, in opening up huge ranges of possibilities for art making with the production of these mysterious works, energized art for the second half of the 20th century in an extraordinary way. And I think it's very important to understand that, for all intents and purposes, the rediscovery of Duchamp takes place largely in Los Angeles. And here is a photograph of that exhibition in the Pasadena Art Museum. All of these works now in the Philadelphia Museum of Art. The Ahrensbergs, at a certain point in the early 50s, had offered the entire collection to the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, and were told, thank you very much, but no thank you. And they all went to Philadelphia instead. And I point out just two ready-mades, or assisted ready-mades, as he called them. This one called Fresh Widow. If you add an N to both words, you come up with French window, which is, in fact, what it is. And so one of the things Duchamp is doing and does continually is play with words. And we will see the young Ed Ruscha picking up this idea that wordplay can be a very rich part of contemporary art. Over here, above the world-famous urinal, fountain, the found object, the most controversial of all the found objects, you have another object. You can't quite see it there. What it is a plastic cover for an Underwood typewriter, which Duchamp called folding object for travelers. And we will come back to this notion of traveling and typewriters in a few minutes. This exhibition, as I say, had huge implications around the world. Slowly, it didn't happen immediately, but by the time Duchamp died in 1968, it was recognized that this one exhibition in the suburbs of Los Angeles had profoundly deflected the direction of contemporary art. And the third event, a few years later, 1 year later, in 1964, is the exhibition of this work by Ed Kienholz, the founder with Walter Hopps of the Ferris Gallery, one of Ed Ruscha's closest young friends, of his backseat Dodge 1938, a scene that endlessly popular American subject, sex in cars. And you see this Dodge where the door was open on the first time it was displayed, and you looked in as if you were a voyeur having come upon them somewhere hidden and see a couple having sex. It was a work shown first at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, where it was so appalled everyone that the trustees determined that the lights would be turned off and the door would only be opened of the car if you asked and if you were over 18. But now, in a very circular way, Duchamp was coming to Los Angeles a lot in those years. He saw Kienholz making this extraordinary object that has now the Return of the Repressed actually in the collection of the Los Angeles County Museum. All of the years that he was working on his great hidden secret work, only to be revealed after his death, and that is the étant donné. This is a given. And I won't show you what you see when you look through the holes this woman is looking through, but again, it is a scene of voyeurism. So, in fact, you even see Duchamp himself thriving from his immersion on this art scene, emerging in Los Angeles, in which, as we will see, Ruscha, friend of Kienholz, friend of Hopps, in this still relatively small world, was coming of age. And right from the beginning, he was doing extraordinary things that have been, if I may say, as some of Duchamp's works have been as well, like time bombs. At first, it was unclear how deeply influential they were going to be. He published in his early years a number of very insignificant, sort of handmade books with his photographs. And the photographs were startlingly dumb. Such as this one, perhaps now the most famous, 26 gasoline stations. As he said, as he would go back and forth visiting his family in Oklahoma, when you drive from Oklahoma to Los Angeles, all you see are gas stations. They're the only interesting thing to look at. So at each one, he would get out and take a straight-on photograph of them, unembellished in any way, and then as a pure set of facts, as it were, pure set of facts, publish them in these unassuming little books. Interestingly, perhaps the first place where this kind of deadpan photography that Ruscha initiates here comes to fruition, where they have their first huge impact, is not in America but in Germany, where a whole generation of photographers like the Beckers, photographing industrial buildings, photographing steel mills, just with completely objective photographs, would take up the implication of early works by Ruscha, a young man in his 20s, such as 26 gasoline stations. And he also became an expert at kind of Dada activities, very much in the spirit of Duchamp himself. One of the most famous that has provoked theorists extraordinarily, it's perhaps the one the theorists of contemporary art write about most, is Royal Road Test. Again, he's driving from Nevada or Oklahoma, someplace, back toward Los Angeles. Those of you who know it know that you drive for hundreds of miles and you never even have to turn the wheel. It's just a straight line. And they had a royal typewriter, and we come back to the typewriter in Duchamp. They had a royal typewriter which at some point, and for some unclear reason, they throw out of the car, going 80 miles an hour, whatever. They throw it out of the car. Then they drive for 70 miles further along, and after 70 miles, in a straight line, they make a U-turn and drive back the 70 miles to find where the typewriter had been thrown, and they photograph, almost as if it were an archaeological dig, all the hundreds of pieces that had been scattered over the road, recording it in yet another of these small books, and recording themselves recording it, as you see in the photograph of shadows on the upper right. I don't know what it means. Something about language, something about travel, something about recuperating the past. I don't know, but as I say, it is with these early works that Ruscha, among that new world that was gaining an interest in Duchamp, identified, if you will, Duchamp's most significant American disciple. But he was also, as Duchamp was doing, he was also beginning to paint. He was painting dumbly straightforward pictures, such as this, not unlike a Warhol's Campbell soup can. Oof, I suppose it's the sound you make when you get punched in the stomach, but he gives no further explanation of it than that. He is becoming ever more immersed in the specific world of Los Angeles in which he is living. He is becoming more and more immersed in the popular culture of Los Angeles, this very, very distinct popular and also high culture that was emerging in that city, and he was fascinated by the things that he was seeing there. You see in these two pictures the kinds of work that he was doing: a Standard Oil station on fire, Norm's drive-in restaurant on fire. He also paints them not on fire, but he is developing his very, very distinctive way of depicting the buildings that he's painting, very closely derived, in fact, from Renaissance traditions of single-point perspective, of what the Italians call in art theory di sotto in su, from below looking up, so that the lines of recession are very strongly reinforced, and looking, as I say, at completely banal architecture of the kind that lines the streets of Los Angeles gas stations, drive-in restaurants. There is Norm's restaurant itself, one of the most famous of what is called Googie architecture in Los Angeles, this sort of vaguely space-age architecture designed for the automobile culture. Ed Ruscha himself points out in these two pictures standards and norms that critics have pointed out to him that there is a wordplay, standards and norms in the about conventional thinking, I guess, in the juxtaposition of images like these. So here, throughout the 60s, he is establishing his reputation for these very distinctly Los Angeles and very deeply conceptually informed works of art. And I just show you what is arguably his most famous picture of all, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art on fire. The Los Angeles County Museum of Art, sitting in the La Brea tar pits on Wilshire Boulevard, had just been completed in 1965. It was the great statement of cultural aspiration for the city of Los Angeles when this complex of buildings was completed in very modern architecture, sitting in pools of water. All of civic aspiration was built into it, but Ruscha depicts it as if disaster has suddenly struck it, flames leaping out the back of the building. He is very interested in this notion that the veneer of civilization, if you will, can be rather quickly, rather suddenly pulled away, and culture under threat. He's gone on, he continues, he's very active to this day, very prolific artist. Many of his later works having a great deal to do with words, with the play of words, as in this years, months, weeks, days, hours, minutes. And in recent years has been exploring photo-based images, such as this picture of a towering mountain with slightly bulging sides, as you see, with the word "the" imposed on it, or maybe, because the T is so much bigger, he. There are several things at play here, none of which Ruscha himself is willing to discuss, and his only response when you propose a reading is, well, maybe, maybe not. But there's no reason for the artist to explain what they're meaning. But I do ask you to keep that letter T in mind in what follows. And what follows takes us back to the series of paintings of 1992 through 2005, Course of Empire. But to get back to what that is about, we have to make another diversion, not through Los Angeles, but through earlier American painting history. And that is to Thomas Cole. The exhibition Thomas Cole, Eden to Empire, is on here at the National Gallery at the exact same time as Ed Ruscha, Course of Empire. The greatest, or one of the greatest achievements of Thomas Cole is a cycle of 5 paintings which he executed in New York in 1836. Well, he actually starts painting it in 1834. It's completed and exhibited in 1836. It traces the rise and fall of a great civilization. He had contemplated it almost from the moment he arrived. He's born in Bolton in Lancashire, emigrates to America in 1818, is sent back by his patrons to find out what's going on in contemporary English and European landscape painting in 1829, and spends 3 years in Europe. Almost upon arriving in London, which he had never seen before, he says he has this idea for a cycle of 5 paintings to trace the rise and fall of a great civilization. The first painting, The Savage State. You see here's a hunter. It's pre-civilization, if you will, hunting there, further hunters here. Their encampment is teepees. You really don't know whether you're in America or Europe, or where indeed you are. The only constant of the series of 5 paintings is this mountain with its distinctive profile, which you'll see in all 5 pictures. The second state is the pastoral state. Civilization has begun. Here, an old philosopher is doing geometry. A young boy is drawing. The arts and sciences are entering. Shepherding, plowing of fields, building of ships, and a kind of Stonehenge where religious observation is taking place. So clearly all the accoutrements of civilization are coming to find themselves in this, what remains a pastoral realm, man still at one with nature. Now, after a couple of years in London, Cole goes down to Italy, spends the next 18 months in Italy studying the ruins of antiquities. Here's a little oil sketch of an aqueduct running across the Roman Campagna. He'll turn it into this big finished picture, the ruins of the grandeur that had been Rome, completely, deeply informed by what he had found of the ancient world in Rome. And it leads to the third great picture of the cycle, consummation. It is the height of empire. The emperor is making his return to the city. The rather sad and gloomy empress watching from afar, not so unlike the world today. And indeed, Cole was very consciously addressing this to America. It is the age of Andrew Jackson. It is the age of the 7th president, the first populist president, the president outrageously playing to his base, demanding that America expand, demanding that America be first, demanding that economic growth was the only thing that mattered in America. And Cole was appalled by that. And he produces this picture showing the imperial capital of the empire at the moment of its greatest expansion, but already with the canker of luxury, excess at play. And certainly he was deeply influenced by the London he saw when he got here, Carlton House Terrace, Regent Street, the buildings in Regent Park, to portray a mighty empire. This inevitably leads to destruction. The barbarians have invaded. It's all over. The rape and pillage is going on. The city is in flames. And that will lead to the final picture in the series, desolation. It's all over. All that remains are ruins, no sign of human life, though there is, say up here, a bird nesting. So there is the very slim possibility that the great cycle will renew itself and start again. For a very long time now, some 30 or more years, Ed Ruscha has been obsessed by this cycle of paintings that are hanging in the National Gallery but belong to the New York Historical Society. Here at the opening of the dual exhibitions the other week is Ruscha talking to the press, preferring to talk to the press in front of the Coles to tell them, rather than his own pictures, to tell them how important they have been to him. And what was so important to him, he said, is this notion that by doing a series of paintings, you can work into the notion of time, the notion that time is passing, that things change, and you can work out a narrative from that. And as I say, he's known these pictures for many years. He's thought about them for many years, and he's long wanted to see his cycle in some kind of proximity to them. So let's go back then to the 10 paintings of Ruscha's Course of Empire. The first, in each case now, and it was his decision that we hang them, double hang them with the first series, blue collar, on the top level, the second series below. He paints a generic building, seems to be a tire shop in the American spelling. There's also a pun, tires, a sense of ennui built into it. And then he comes back 12 years later. That building is now undergoing expansion. An addition is being made to it, but we don't know what it's going to house. 12 years later, the economy has changed. Something is expanding, but it remains unclear. And I point out, as has been pointed out, these works of 1992, and you notice the very violent storm in the sky. These works of 1992 follow by only a year the riots that set Los Angeles afire in 1991. Wherever you were in that great low flat city, you could see the flames, you could see the storm, and he does not deny that that influenced the black and white paintings. In the second grouping, same year, you have tool and die. On one level, a tool and die factory. Again, it's 1992. If you take tool as a sexual pun, tool and die cannot help but call to mind the AIDS crisis of those years. 12 years later, the tool and die building has been taken over by a Korean concern. It's not real Korean writing. You just like the look of it. It doesn't mean anything. And it's also been taken over by the graffiti artists all along here. So in that way, too, Los Angeles is undergoing change. The third group, trade school. 12 years later, the trade school is closed. The windows are boarded up. There is chain link and barbed wire surrounding it, so you can't get to it. If you are no longer manufacturing anything in your country, there's no need, perhaps, to train people to do it. That has passed away, and something about the economic condition that is now beginning to afflict the blue-collar worker in America is made apparent in a picture like this. Perhaps the most amusing of the five, a telephone booth, is, of course, a kind of rudimentary building. And in 1992 there it said, but by 2005, who needs a telephone booth anymore? It has become absolutely vestigial technology. We all carry our phones in our pocket, and so has been replaced, has been removed, and a tree is begun to grow and a lamppost is there, but the old technology is of no longer of any use. And then the final cycle, the final picture in the cycle began as the Tech Chem building. 12 years later, it has become something called Fat Boy. Is it a food restaurant chain? Who knows? But one cannot help in this, and I think you can still see the letters Tech Chem there peeling away, almost gone. But you will recall that the two bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August of 1945 are Little Boy and Fat Man. So clearly there is some vestigial echo of that in this choice of words, Fat Boy, for this picture. And indeed, the city looks like, with this red, livid red sky, it looks like the city is in flames, which carries you back in a whole series of allusions to the burning of Los Angeles in 1991, to the end of the Second World War to Cole's destruction when the city is in flames. And so he has set up a whole series of allusions, references, rippling down the years and the centuries. And very interestingly, when these cycles were shown in Venice in 2005 and then in New York in 2006, Tech Chem and Fat Boy were the first paintings in the cycle. When Ed Ruscha arrived 2 weeks ago to work with us to hang the exhibition, and we had laid it out in the sequence of Venice and New York, he said, no, this is going to be last. Again, he didn't explain, but it is, actually, let me go, it is, as you see, as you move around, before you go out the door, it is the last grouping of pictures you see. So in some sense, maybe even the cycle has become a little bit more apocalyptic. And let me say something about the hang. It was Ruscha's idea when I showed him room 1 that it would be perfect for the display, even though the pictures could not hang side by side. It only took him a few minutes to say we will double hang them. And that everyone will be able to see everything at the same time. Quite a new way of experiencing them. And you notice he wanted the top pictures to lean out. We started off thinking about 7 degrees. They're actually leaning out about 12 degrees, as you often see in old master picture galleries, where they're hung on 2 levels. The top one will lean out. And I think what he was very much responding to was the possibility of seeing this cycle in an institution like the National Gallery, primarily devoted to old master paintings, insinuating it into that old master context, and indeed presenting them in that way, knowing that not so far away in the Thomas Cole exhibition was that work that had so influenced him, been so preying on his mind for many decades, Thomas Cole's The Course of Empire. And I just end with this marvelous image. The other year, Ruscha was invited to choose pictures from the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna that he particularly admired. And this was the title that he chose, and the projection of the title he chose for that exhibition in Vienna. The ancients stole all our great ideas. And Thomas Cole, a century and a half ago, almost 2 centuries, had stolen the idea that Ed Ruscha would then examine in his Course of Empire. So thank you very much.